with some things about how his epistemology carries over in application to matters of religion, to ethics, and his writings on politics. Perhaps the crucial point of connection between his epistemology and these other areas of thought is the evidentialism which we highlighted last time. That is to say, his insistence that we should proportion our beliefs to the evidence. That we should proportion our beliefs to the evidence. Now, that has a very evident kind of effect when it comes to his discussion about revelation and reason, faith and reason, which he gets into actually in Book 4 of his essay concerning human understanding, in chapters 18 and 19. I mentioned that so that you can look them up since they're not in our anthology. And both of those chapters work on the assumption that revelation may be regarded as the addition of further propositions to those which we know by reason alone. Now, reflect on that for a moment. The first reaction you might have is, yes, knowledge as he talks about it consists of propositions. Propositions that embody judgments, with subject and predicate. After all, knowledge derives from ideas where you predicate something of a subject. So we've been talking about knowledge in that sense. Revelation adds to that knowledge additional propositions that are not known by reason alone. So revelation then is propositional revelation. And the orthodoxy in you may feel like applauding John Locke, but it should be noted that he tends to confine his thinking about divine revelation to simply added propositions. That is to say, the interpersonal immediacy of religious experience is not something which he includes within that definition of revelation. And we'll be commenting on this a little bit more later on. He seems to be quite adverse to what he thinks of as any continuing revelation of a private sort, such as in some of the pietist traditions, holiness traditions of that day, were becoming evident, even in Wesley. That was known as enthusiasm, and he has a whole chapter in which he opposes religious enthusiasm in that sense. Now, the underlying reason for this, as I say, is in his view that all knowledge is propositional, consisting of propositions. So that revelation consists of propositions. Some revealed propositions may be known also by reason, but obviously if they're known by revelation as well, they're not known by reason alone. His point is that propositions that are in accordance with reason may well be acceptable as revelation. Propositions that go beyond reason but are not contradicting reason would likewise be acceptable candidates as revelation. But anything which goes contrary to reason, contradicts reason, could not be revelation. His point being simply that what we know of what God has made by natural reason cannot be contradicted by what God has said by special revelation. God does not contradict himself. But woven through that is sort of a rational criterion. Let reason be your guide. A rational criterion for the evaluation of purported revelation. Now, granted that there is indeed divine revelation of this sort, revealed propositions have the highest degree of certainty of all propositions, because they come to us from God with his certification, as it were. The question is, how do we know what is revealed? And that is what has to be adjudged by reason. So revelation, then, consisting of propositions. Now, faith, therefore, is defined in that regard. Faith is assent to propositions on the credit or testimony of the proposer. It is assent to propositions on the testimony of the proposer. And let me read a couple of short paragraphs here about what he has to say about reason in relationship to faith. Reason is distinguished from faith. I take to be the discovery of the certainty or probability of propositions or truths which the mind arrives at by deduction from ideas which it has by means of natural faculties. That is to say, ideas known by sensation or reflection. So reason, then, is the discovery of the certainty or probability of propositions deduced from ideas acquired by natural means. Faith, on the other hand, is assent to any proposition that is not made out by reason, but upon the credit of the proposer as coming from God, in some extraordinary way of communication. This way of discovering truths to men we call revelation. So faith is assent to proposition. And again, you might well ask yourself, is that the totality of his conception of faith? Seems to be a purely cognitive kind of act. Well, it's in the light of that what he calls enthusiasm, private revelation, inner light kind of revelation as in the Quaker tradition, those kinds of things are by him discarded. Revelation without reason cannot be assented to. So revelation and reason. Now, Locke seems to be fairly guarded in what he says. There's more problem, I think, in what he doesn't say than in what he does say. But what he does say, taken by itself, seems to open the door for a kind of approach to religion independently of revelation. And so the development of deism in the 18th century is often ascribed to Locke's unwitting influence. That is to say, one can know a great deal by reason alone, and deism is an attempt to develop a religious view by means of reason alone, independently of revelation. So deism then traces something of its beginnings to Locke. You have to say, though, that even before Locke, there was quite actively developing in Britain what was known as natural religion. Sometimes in a Platonic context, but ever since the Renaissance it had been developing. That is to say, religion on the basis of natural knowledge alone, independently of revelation. So deism was on one hand a further development of that, and on the other hand it was a development that seems to have been spurred by Lockean epistemology. Okay, any question, comment there? Yeah?
So Locke has, say, Christ and
yes.
the outside reason therefore
No, he himself, you see, accepts not only the possibility of revelation, but accepts the Christian revelation, accepts the scripture. In his book, The Reasonableness of Christianity, you might want to take a look at that. What he does is to look at Christianity using the kind of rational criterion that we've mentioned. And depending on whose interpretation of what he's saying you follow, he can be taken as a thoroughly orthodox Christian. His emphasis in talking of Christ is much more on Christ as the Messiah than it is on Christ, the incarnate second person of the Trinity. But just a quick scanning of that book makes it obvious that it's his attempt to pull together biblical propositions into some sort of coherent teaching. That's his work, The Reasonableness of Christianity. He has another work on religion called Letter on Toleration, a letter on toleration, which perhaps is helpful in putting the context there. This is at the end of the 17th century, when England had gone through its civil war, which was a mixture of religious and political conflict. The Catholic-Protestant conflict in England continued way on through the 17th century with James II, who was finally ousted from the throne, you remember, in a bloodless revolution in 1688. And the Protestants, William and Mary, came over from Holland to take over the throne. So there was that tension all the time. There wasn't much tolerance. In fact, it was in that period that a 5-mile act was passed forbidding dissenters, that's non-Church of England, worshipping within 5 miles of a community of a certain size. I have some interesting recollections of the significance of this from my childhood. I grew up in Dover on the southeast corner of England in a Baptist family. And it was a matter of habit, custom in that church, every Good Friday for virtually the entire church to literally walk 5-6 miles out into the country to a little village called Aythorne to celebrate the anniversary of that little church that seated about 60 or 100 people out in Aythorne. And so did people from other churches across that whole part of Kent, converging down the spokes of the wheel, Canterbury, Folkestone, Herne, Margate, Ramsgate, Sandwich, Deal, if you know that part of the country, down the spokes of the wheel to the hub there at Aythorne. You know, I didn't realise until, a commemoration of what they had to do back there, before there was an edict of toleration back in the 19th century, which made it permissible for Baptists to worship within their hometowns. You see. Now here's John Locke, back in the late 17th century, arguing for religious toleration. You see, the rule of reason, advocating freedom of belief and the practice of that belief. Yeah. So what's the alternative to some sort of rational balance in that sort of situation of conflict? Well, the only alternative to rational mediation of dispute is power politics. You see, that's what's going on with the politicization of the universities in this country nowadays, with the political correctness movement. You see. Well, it's going on back there in a very different context. So John Locke's a very interesting character. All right, moral knowledge. How does his epistemology come to bear in matters of ethics? Well, first of all, as you've already read, there are no innate moral ideas. There's no innate moral knowledge. His empiricism disallows that, and his argument against innate ideas is specific in this regard. The arguments against innate ideas in terms of diversity of beliefs and so on and so forth from culture to culture, John Locke has those. All of our moral knowledge, then, must, like every other kind of knowledge, be ultimately derived from our simple ideas of sensation and reflection. Now, how's that going to be? How's that going to be? Well, what he does suggest is that there are 3 means by which we have acquired moral knowledge. One is by demonstration. Remember, he says there are 3 kinds of knowledge generally, by intuition, demonstration, and sensation. Well, nothing by way of intuition, but by demonstration, yes. We can deduce moral knowledge from our knowledge of God and knowledge of the self as rational being. And of course, by virtue of Descartes' cogito ergo sum, Locke was willing to say that we know ourselves as rational beings. What am I on a thinking being, a rational being? So when in his essay on civil government he talks about human rights, what he's trying to do, you see, is to articulate what it is that is proper to a rational being, what is deducible from the fact that we are rational beings. In fact, he has a much longer work dealing with that, a work called An Essay on the Law of Nature, on the Laws of Nature, which is a kind of essay on natural moral law, essay on the laws of nature. And in that, he argues for this kind of moral knowledge. The second way of gaining moral knowledge is from sensation and reflection, from experience, that is to say, inasmuch as God has conjoined morality to our happiness, so that in practice, pleasure and pain tend to be our moral teachers. Pleasure and pain tend to be our moral teachers. And simply in terms of the empirical probabilities which that involves, we come to certain conclusions as to what we will and will not, should and should not do. Rightness, you notice, moral rightness becomes a matter of practical utility, so that Locke, gain unwittingly, is opening the path towards utilitarianism, which is going to be developing shortly. He's not the first, incidentally. If you hark back to Bacon and Hobbes, you recall that they valued knowledge for its practical utility, and Hobbes' whole approach to ethics and to politics was in terms of the very important utility of avoiding that war of all against all and making possible survival and peace. So the second means of gaining moral knowledge. The third way of gaining moral knowledge is from the biblical revelation. The Bible teaches us a lot of moral matters, and divine moral laws given in Scripture is the final criterion, the supreme criterion for what is morally right. So his epistemology then, along with its application to religion together, lead into the kind of ethics that he would advocate. Now, see this also in regards to human freedom. Remember that this is the age of mechanistic science, cause-effect mechanisms, so that people like Hobbes have become thoroughgoing determinists. There is no real freedom of will or of action. Descartes, on the other hand, had tried to preserve human freedom by making the mind, the thinking thing, an exception to the causal mechanisms of science. His mind-body dualism is what preserved freedom of the will. Locke follows Descartes rather closely in this regard. He wants to preserve human freedom. But he defines human freedom as the freedom to act in accordance with one's choice, the freedom to do or not to do what I desire, freedom of action. The question of freedom of will, free choice, he regards as a meaningless debate. A meaningless debate, because it's mixing two categories, confusing two different powers of the person. The power to do or not to do, the power to act, and on the other hand, the power to think, to prefer. Yeah, we do indeed think, reflect on our actions. We do prefer doing one thing rather than another. But preferences can well be caused rather than being free. And ideas, reflection, is likewise caused by what is going on in the world of sensations. And so it's not so much wanting, desiring, willing that is free, because the desire, the conative, the will is so influenced by ideas that are caused, as it is rather the actions that are free. So one is free when he is able to act in accordance with his desires. Now, that is somewhat different from Descartes. He's like Descartes in as much as that freedom of action is possible because we are reflecting beings, reflecting on our actions and acting. But he's different from Descartes in that he's not talking of freedom of the will so much as of freedom of action. And that is what plays a crucial role in his political thinking. Because the thing that is proper to a human being, endowed as a rational being, with freedom of action, the thing that is proper to such a human being is that we be granted the freedom to act. You see? And so his conception of freedom immediately begins to develop a theory of rights. And as those of you are well aware who've taken any ethics course that gets into the theory of rights, these are correlatives. If I have a right to life, you should grant me the freedom to live. If I have a right to property, you should grant me the freedom to own property. Freedoms and rights are correlated. You see. So what Locke is doing is coming at matters of political philosophy on the basis of this kind of theory of human freedom. Now, what he does then in his